Ahoy, my friends. Welcome aboard the Afro Tales podcast. I'm your storyteller, Aman Mazinga. Join me as we explore the tales that grew from the people of indigenous and African descent in the Americas and the Caribbean. After, come and see me, chef, who will impart upon you a recipe for the story you have just heard. So with no further ado, let us set sail on this new age of exploration. Susanna and Simon. There once was a man who had a mighty pretty daughter named Susanna. She was so pretty that she had more sweethearts than a man has fingers and toes. But her daddy didn't like any of them. Still, they kept on coming around and pestering the household. By and by, he gave word that any man who cleared 6 acres of land and rolled up the logs and piled up the brush in one day, that man could marry his daughter. Of course, this seemed as easy as climbing a greased pole with 2 baskets of eggs. All the suitors dropped off, except a great big strapping fellow who looked like he was strong enough to knock a steer down. This young man's name was Simon. He truly loved Susanna, but what was far more important, she loved him back. Well, Simon went up to the gal's daddy and said, "If anybody can clean up this here land, I'm the one to do it. Leastways, I'm going to try mighty hard." The old man just laughed and said, "That's fine by me. You start in the morning." Just then, Susanna bustled in saying, "I just have to fix a little something in the cupboard." But when her daddy wasn't looking, she took and kissed her hand and blew Simon a kiss. Then she nodded her head to signal her sweetheart that everything would turn out fine. That was all Simon needed. He went off as happy as a jaybird after he's robbed a sparrow's nest. But there was trouble brewing, for Susanna's father was a witch. He could conjure anyone who wasn't wearing a rabbit's foot. Simon always wore a lucky rabbit's foot his grandma had given him. So the man went away to study just what he could do if Simon cleared the land, unlikely as that seemed. However, Susanna's pa had been working at his conjurements so long that Susanna had learned most of his tricks. The spunky girl, who was as clever as she was pretty, decided to take the matter of her future into her own hands. So, the next morning, when Simon came by the house to borrow an axe, Susanna ran and got it for him. When she did, she sprinkled some black sand on it and said, "Axe, cut, axe." Then she rubbed her hair across it and gave it to Simon along with a little pouch of red cloth. When he took both these things, Susanna said, "Go down by the creek and get 7 white pebbles and put them in this little pouch bag. When you want the axe to cut, shake them." Simon went off into the woods, and he started to clear up the 6 acres. Then, remembering what Susanna had told him, he shook the red bag right off. The axe flew out of his hands and began to chop the trees so fast that Simon only saw a cloud of wood chips. Every time he shook the pebbles, the axe would cut, and the trees would fall, and the limbs would drop off, and the logs would roll up together, and the brush would pile itself up. He could have finished by the time the dinner horn blew, but he hung back because he didn't want Susanna's daddy to know he'd done the work using condiments. So he finished the last bit himself. 2 hours before sunset, the whole 6 acres was cleaned up. Just then, the man came along with Susanna to see how the work was getting on. And was he ever surprised? He didn't know what to do or say. He wasn't about to give up his daughter to Simon. For a time, he walked around and thought about how he could get out of his bargain. At last, he said, "Look like you real forehanded with your work." Susanna smiled and put a finger to her lips. Simon shrugged his, "Yes, sir. When I starts on a job, I can't stop till it gets done. Some of this timber was rough and tough, but I had worse jobs than this in my time." To himself, the witch wondered, "What kind of folks is this?" Out loud, he said, "Well, since you so spry, there's 2 more acres across the creek there. If you clear them up for supper, you can come to the house and get the gal." "Now, Papa, that ain't fair," protested Susanna. She was being careful not to let her daddy know that she wasn't the least bit worried on account of the magic she had given her sweetheart. Meanwhile, Simon scratched his head because he wasn't sure if those pebbles would hold out, but Susanna gave him a wink. So he put on a bold face and told Susanna's father, "Well, sir, I'll go across there and clean up the 2 acres soon as I rest a bit." The conjure man went on home, but Susanna lingered just long enough to rub her hair once more over the axe blade. Then she gave her boo a quick kiss and ran after her father. As soon as the others were out of sight, Simon jumped across the creek and shook the pebbles at the 2 acres of woods. Slick as owl grease, the trees were cut down and piled up. As soon as Susanna got home, her daddy said to her, "Well, daughter, it sure looked like Simon is going to get you for his bride." Clever Susanna just hung her head and looked fretful and said, "Oh, I don't care nothing special about him." She was a sharp-eyed gal who just saw how angry her pa was getting because Simon had cleared the land. He could be a mighty mean witch, and she was afraid he might get suspicious if she seemed too happy about marrying Simon. Well, when Simon come up to the house and said the 2 acres were cleared, the daddy made like he was glad for the way things turned out. But Susanna could see that he was really as sour as a week-old buttermilk. When he went across to the barn, she took Simon by the hand and pulled him into the kitchen, and she whispered, "If we don't run off away this very minute, That gonna kill you for sure. Then she snatched a hen's egg out of a basket, a meal bag, and a skillet. At first, Simon said, "Oh, I can't believe what you telling me." But Susanna just took him to the window and showed him where her daddy was coming across from the barn in the moonlight, carrying a big old knife and looking as angry as an old bull. One seed is worth 20 years. Simon didn't argue when Susanna grabbed his hand and took off running. But he had a mighty hard time keeping up with the girl who ran as swiftly as a startled deer. Susanna didn't even look back ever. She hauled Simon along with one hand while she held egg, meal bag, and skillet in the other. When the witch man saw Simon and Susanna running away, he took right on after them, faster than lightning, with his knife in his hand. He was so mad, he snorted like a horse, while blue smoke came out of his nose and his eyes turned red as a vomits in the dark. He kept gaining on them until by and by he had almost caught them. But Susanna yelled to Simon, "Fling down your coat." The instant his coat touched the ground, a big, thick wood sprang up. But the daddy, he just cut his way through it with his big old knife and kept chasing after him. Pretty quickly, he caught up to him. But Susanna dropped her hen's egg on the ground, and when it broke, a big fog rose up out of the ground for a time. The man got lost, but he conjured some fierce winds and that blew the fog away. So he was chasing after the young folk again pretty quickly. But when he got so close that he could almost grab Simon's shirt tail, Susanna dropped the meal sack and a big pond of water covered the ground where it fell. The man was in such a hurry that he first tried to drink it dry. He found that he couldn't do this. He sat on the bank and blew on the water. His breath was hot as a furnace, and straight away the water boiled off. Then he was after Simon and Susanna again. As fast as the two lovers ran, the witch man ran faster. Having nothing left to try, Susanna dropped the skillet. Instantly, a thick, dark cloud fell down. The man didn't know which way to go. But he had plenty of magic tricks of his own, and quickly he made the darkness lift up so that he could see where the others had gotten to. He made up for lost time, and pretty soon he was as close to them as bark on a tree. After this, Susanna said to Simon, "Take the red cloth I give you and drop a pebble." Simon did this, and a high hill sprang up. But the witch climbed it lickety-split and kept on coming. Susanna said, "Drop another pebble." This time Simon dropped a bigger pebble, and a higher mountain popped up. But that man crawled up it and down it and came right on after the lovers. Then Susanna said to Simon, "Fling down the whole bag." The second he dropped it, a big rock wall rose up. It was so high that the witch man couldn't get over it. He ran up and down the length of it, snorting and shouting, but he couldn't find an end. Finally, after a long time, he gave up and went home. On the other side of the high wall, Susanna sat down beside Simon, took his hand in hers, and said, "Now we can rest." And that's where their story ends. Wow, this was a great story. And as I'm thinking about it, I don't think we've done many stories like this. This story comes cut from the same cloth, American Women of Myth, Legend, and Tall Tale by Robert SanSouce and Brian Pinckney. This story about a man trying to gain a woman's hand and having to do tasks to do it, and the girl or woman helping him out they are wonderful stories about love, and I appreciate them because it's a mutual love. It's not just, coming to rescue a damsel in distress type story. It is two lovers that want to be together, but for whatever reason, the father figure in the story, whether that just be a actual father or a king or the devil or whatever, makes it almost impossible to gain their daughter's hand. Now, I feel like you can look at this two ways. It could be an overbearing father that doesn't want to let his daughter go, and therefore he tries to create tasks that no man can complete because he doesn't feel any man is ever good enough for his daughter. Or it is a loving father who is just trying to ensure that the right man is coming for his daughter, one who truly deserves her. But I'd probably say it's the first one, since normally the father figure gives chase. He gives chase after the couple when they, do the task and want to head on out. So, but I like these stories, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head if what other stories I've done like this. I'd have to go. Hopefully, there'll be some in the show notes for you. But I don't have much for this. I like the magic of her using her hair to help him out. I like the items she used. They're not conventional items. Using a pan and an egg. Eggs are normal in these types of stories, but pebbles and it reminds me a lot of like hoodoo magic, and I love it. I don't have a lot to say about this story. It's a love story, and basically saying that nothing can keep two people that really want to be together apart. If they want to be together, they'll be together, and if you have somebody like that in your life, be with them, be with them. Anyway, go see Chef. He has a wonderful Southern recipe for you this week. And until we meet again, thank you for coming on this voyage, and thank you for sharing with everyone you have shared with. And until next time, as always, have a blessed day. Welcome, my friends, to the galley. I am your chef, and today we have a wonderful recipe inspired by the story you've just had. Today, we will be creating smothered southern oxtails. Now, what do you need for this delicious recipe? 2 pounds of oxtails, 1 cup of onion, 4 cups of beef broth, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 4 tablespoons of browning, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup of butter, 1 teaspoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. Now, how do we put this together? Easy. First, add the browning, Worcestershire sauce, salt, and pepper to the oxtails. Mix that well and set aside until later. Now, set the slow cooker to browning. If you do not have the browning setting, saute, or sear setting on your slow cooker, you will just do this in a skillet on your stovetop. If not, you can use the dump and go, where you just dump everything in a slow cooker and go about your day. Now, first, add the onions and saute for 2 minutes. Add the flour and whisk until it is golden brown. Add the beef broth, brown sugar, paprika, onion powder, garlic powder, then mix. Add the oxtail, then bring your liquid to a light simmer. Cover, then change the settings from browning to slow cook. Allow them to cook for 4 hours, and that is it, my friends. Now, go. Make this recipe yours. And until I have another wonderful recipe for you, remember the love of Susanna and Simon. And until next time, my friends, as always, enjoy.
Thank you, my friends, for coming on this voyage. Thanks to Art by Chalet for the logo, episode, and shirt designs. You can get t-shirts and other items on tpublic.com. You can contact me on all socials at AfroTalesCast. That's AfroTales Cast. And email me at AfroTalesCast@gmail.com. You may also become a benefactor by simply sharing with any and everyone, giving a thumbs up, a 5-star rating and review in your podcast app of choice, or simply donating on Patreon or Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. So until we meet again, may your winds be fair and your seas follow.